Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First thing, of course, thank you very much for inviting Insurance Europe to speak in this event. Just a word on Insurance Europe first. Insurance Europe is the European Insurance and Reinsurance Federation. We are actually representing national insurance associations, 34 of them across Europe. Of course, UNSAR is our member for Romania. Through this different national insurance association, we represent approximately 5,000 insurance and reinsurance companies across Europe. So it goes from the big international pan-European players, you know, the big names that you all know, to the local and pretty small insurance and companies. Through these companies, we provide jobs to approximately 1 million persons directly, the employees, and we provide, in addition, another million jobs indirectly through distribution channels, repair shops, etc., etc. Maybe just before responding to your question, I'd like maybe to give a couple of comments on the title of the panel, because that's a very interesting one. This panel, How to Balance Consumer Protection and Consumer Responsibility in Financial Services. Of course, I very much agree with what has been said before. Consumers are at the core of the insurance business, at the heart of the insurance business. The whole insurance industry's objective is to serve the consumers. This is a point which is well accepted and which has to be well integrated by all the players in the European market. The point is that when I look at the title, How to Balance Consumer Protection and Consumer Responsibility in Financial Services, it sounds very much like if these two things, consumer protection on the one hand and consumer responsibility on the other hand, were actually opposing to each other. And I don't think so. I actually think that if you want to reach an appropriate level of consumer protection, you have to give to the consumers responsibility, and consumers themselves have to take responsibility in insurance and financial services. Of course, there is a role for the regulators, there is a role for the supervisors, this is very clear, and this is not something I'm going to question. But it's also very important that the regulatory framework does not move consumers away from their own responsibilities and their own role in the act of purchasing insurance products. I'll give you just two examples. The first one is risk awareness. The second one is financial education, which have been mentioned but very briefly this morning. Risk awareness. I think actually that the worst risk for consumers is not to be aware of the risks they're exposed to. The financial risk, of course, I'm thinking about pensions, but also the natural catastrophes, this kind of risk. And it's very important that the industry, together with the regulatory authorities, the supervisory authorities, the public authorities as a whole, are working in coordination to raise the awareness of the consumers, of the citizens, about the risk they're exposed to, and the fact that there are ways and means on the market to protect themselves against the risk that might occur, right? And also to raise their awareness about the danger for them of not being insured properly or sufficiently. The second point is financial education, very important. I've seen many research about the EU which were showing that actually more than half of the citizens in the EU do not understand what a percentage is. A percentage, right. We've been talking about streamlining or simplifying the insurance products, streamlining and simplifying the pre-contractual information. Of course, we have to do so. You made the point actually that the information we provide today is very complex. But it's complex because we have to comply with regulatory obligations. This is a point. But simplification of information, sure, yes, let's try and do that together, public and private sector together. But there will be a limit to which you can simplify the information for the insurance product. You need to work also on financial literacy and financial education for the consumers. So bringing down the level of complexity of the information, which is provided to the consumers, and also leveling up the level of financial education so that the consumers can understand actually the disclosures that are provided to them by the insurance companies or the insurance intermediaries about the product that they intend to purchase or not. So empowering consumers, enabling consumers to take informed decisions that request actually a combination of different actions. Simplification of the information, but also financial literacy. And again, this is really a call to everyone around the table, the public sector, the public authorities and the private sector. We need to work together to improve this financial literacy and this financial education across Europe, but also I'm looking at Mr. Baumüller across the world. This is, I think, a key challenge for the future, for the industry and for the consumers. You've been referring to the developments at European level, where you would be amazed, actually, by the number of regulatory initiatives at European level when it comes to consumer protection and insurance or financial services as a whole. What is directly coming to my mind about insurance and consumer protection at European level is actually more the revision of the Insurance Mediation Directive, which is actually addressing issues such as conflict of interest, how to manage and prevent conflict of interest, how to address the question of remuneration, you know, transparency of remuneration, or even prohibiting certain types of remuneration, but also the question of advice, the question of disclosure about the sales. The revision of the Insurance Mediation Directive is a project which is ongoing at the moment. There was a vote in the European Parliament last month, and I can tell you that what the European Parliament has voted on is completely different from what the European Commission has proposed a year and a half ago. And we know that, I don't know whether you're familiar with the EU processes, but there's still the EU Council, which is representing member states, which has to discuss its own position on the revision of the Insurance Mediation Directive. And once this will be done, then the three institutions, the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the EU Council will have to sit together at the same table and negotiate and agree on a compromise. And given the differences between the European Commission's position, the European Parliament's position, I can tell you that it's actually completely unpredictable what is going to be the outcome of the negotiation between the three institutions. What I can tell you is what is going to be very controversial: remuneration, conflict of interest, advice, professional requirements, and of course the special treatment of insurance products with an investment element. The second project, which is also, I think, very, very relevant for today's discussion, is what we call the PRIPS regulation. PRIPS, that means Package Retail Investment Products. If you ask me what is a PRIPS today, I can tell you I don't know. Because again, we have different positions from the different institutions. Some are saying that, well, only unit-linked life insurance products should be considered as PRIPS, investment products. Others are saying that even life insurance products with a guarantee, so where there is actually no investment risk for the consumer, would be considered as PRIPS. And in the European Parliament, they would like also to include pensions products in the scope of PRIPS. The overall idea of this regulation is actually to come up with a simplified disclosure document. So to have all the pre-contractual information about the product that would fall into the PRIPS regulation into a 2-pager or 4-pager. That's a very nice objective, and of course, as the insurance industry, we support that very much. You said before, we have to comply with the regulatory obligation when it comes to disclosure. This is indeed the case, and that's indeed an issue, because there is an overload of information that we have to provide to the consumer. We see that the consumer does not understand the information we provide to him if the consumer is reading the information. But most of the time, actually, the situation is that because there is a pile of pre-contractual disclosures, the consumer looks at it and says, well, you know, I'm just going to take this contract and I'll read that later on. And the moment when the consumer is reading that is when there is a damage and a claim. But it's too late. It's too late to look at the coverage and the exclusion. The consumer should look at this before the contract is concluded. This is very important. So we support the objective of streamlining the pre-contractual information. My concern is that, and sorry, I know this is the house of democracy here, is that when the policymakers are actually taking this subject, they start with this very good objective in mind, but we end up with actually more information than we had at the beginning. And this is actually what is happening now at European level. The European Parliament said, okay, let's work on simplifying information, but at the end of the day, actually, now we ended up with not only one key information disclosure document, but actually, if I'm not mistaken, 4 different ones for the same product, or 5. So there will be a key information document, which is 4.5 pages, just with the titles when it's not filled in by the intermediaries or distribution channels, so it could be longer than 4 pages. We have an annex, which would disclose the costs about the distribution channels. We have also another document about costs, but this the European Parliament doesn't say exactly what would be in it, so that's a big question mark. There would be a separate insurance document to come on top of this. And in addition to all this, we would still have to deliver all the pre-contractual information which is resulting from the Solvency II Framework Directive, and which very often are actually similar to this pre-contractual information that you can find in the key information document of the European Parliament. But we'll have to disclose both information, even if equivalent, in a different format and a different wording. So of course the risk there is that the consumer is really confused by this overload of information. He can even be misled by this information because there are some overlaps, because there are some contradictions in the text of the European Parliament. And that's a huge risk for the consumer first, because that would not enable the consumer to take an informed decision, but also for the companies and the industry, because there is a reputation risk behind for the industry. If the consumer is buying a product thinking that this product will deliver this and this benefits or services, and that finally it does not, because the pre-contractual information we had to deliver was actually complying with the regulation at European level and was not correct in that manner, of course the consumer is going to lose confidence in the industry and in the products. And behind the risk, again, is that the consumers, because they're losing faith in the products and the industry, are not taking the correct action, so are not taking the insurance product that would actually cover them against the risk they face with. So again, the pensions gap in the future, so consumers will not take responsibility for preparing their own pension. So this is the risk behind. As Insurance Europe, of course, we're working very hardly on explaining to the policymakers what would be the best option in terms of really concretely simplifying the information and making sure that the consumer is in a position to understand this information and take an informed decision on whether to purchase a product or not. But you know, today it is actually the 13th of March. We have the European election in 2 months. So everything which is before the European election is extremely political, right?